WRC-TV, Channel 4, Washington.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
Good morning. This is Today. It's Tuesday, May 16th. I'm Frank McGee, and here are the headlines. Alabama Governor George Wallace is holding his own after surgery. A 21-year-old Milwaukee man has been arrested as his assailant. Primaries are being conducted today in Maryland and in Michigan. And those headlines explain in a way why the Today Show is split up this morning. Barbara Walters is in Detroit to cover the primary in Michigan and the Michigan story. And I have moved from Detroit to Washington for our coverage of the shooting of George Wallace, a shooting that has shocked and outraged the nation and has at least temporarily curtailed a political race in which Governor Wallace was a strong runner. For an up-to-the-minute report on the condition of Governor Wallace, we switch now to NBC News correspondent Gordon Graham at Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland.
The last medical report on Governor Wallace was issued 5 hours ago. At that time, his condition was listed as still serious but stable. An attending physician, Dr. Joseph Shano, said the governor was hit by 4 bullets, all on the right side. 2 of those shots apparently entered his abdominal cavity, and one of them remains lodged near his spinal column. The governor is paralyzed from the waist down. Dr. Shano says it will be 48 hours before it can be determined whether that condition is permanent. The governor's press aide, Billy Joe Camp, says Mrs. Cornelia Wallace remained with the governor in the recovery room throughout the night, and she is encouraged by the doctor's report and is very optimistic about her husband's chances for a full recovery. Regarding Governor Wallace's future political plans, well, Mr. Camp said the campaign effort will continue, with Mrs. Wallace picking up her husband's share of the campaign load. Mrs. Wallace passed word that they will be at the Democratic Convention in Miami, and she has every confidence that George Wallace will be elected to the White House in November. The next medical bulletin is scheduled for 1 hour from now, and we'll have a report. This is Gordon Graham, Holy Cross Hospital, Silver Spring, Maryland. Now back to Frank McGee in Washington.
Ironically, Wallace was gunned down in Maryland, the state where 8 years ago he made a strong showing in his first competition in Democratic national politics. Wallace was on a campaign stop in the town of Laurel, not far from Washington, mingling with the shopping center crowd when the shooting occurred. The bullets hit the governor in the stomach, the right arm, and near the spine. Wallace lurched and then crumpled to the ground, bleeding profusely but lying quietly, as his wife Cornelia, blood streaking her yellow dress, bent over him. Wallace was carried to a hospital where the bullets were removed from the arm and stomach. A 3rd bullet remains lodged dangerously near the spine. It is that bullet which, doctors fear, poses a threat of paralysis. 3 other persons were wounded in the shooting: Alabama State Trooper E.C. Dothard, Secret Service agent Nick Zarvos, and Dora Thompson, a Wallace campaign worker. None is in serious condition. Only seconds after the shooting, police and bodyguards pounced on a blond 21-year-old man, Arthur Brimmer of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who, all smiles, had been standing near the front of the platform when Wallace descended to shake hands. Here's the way the shooting looked. Though he frequently does not, stepped into the crowd at the end of his speech in response to audience pleas of, "Come on, George, shake my hand." Then the gunfire. George Wallace seriously wounded. Arthur Brimmer pummeled, knocked to the ground, and held by police.
Get these people back. Come on.
Ladies and gentlemen, get back. Are you working against him?
Arthur Bremer, as he stood in a crowd, would not have aroused the suspicion of anyone. To NBC News cameraman Charles Feckerty, who took these pictures at an earlier Wallace rally, Bremer appeared as just another rather nice-looking young man there to listen and occasionally applaud George Wallace. There was nothing suspicious in his manner, or certainly his dress. He seemed young, middle-class conservatism itself, right down to the reassuring jacket button, which, in keeping with the spirit of most Wallace rallies, urged the onlooker to stand up for America. And certainly one question now is what happens to the Wallace campaign, and the answer at the moment seems to be that the campaign will continue, although George Wallace will, of necessity, drastically curtail his personal campaigning. His aides insist that his effort to capture the Democratic presidential nomination will continue. Well, what kind of a man is Arthur Bremer? That's an easy enough question to answer, but it may prove, or to ask, but it may prove quite difficult to answer. Newsmen, however, have spoken with Bremer's father and with his brother. And in just a moment, we will have a report from NBC News correspondent John Palmer in Chicago. This is Today on NBC. Except for John Wilkes Booth, who was an extrovert actor, those men who physically attack public figures have, on the whole, been obscure, rather shy men. The gunshots that propelled them into notoriety also set off a sudden and furious search into their past. And today, that is the case with a young man from Milwaukee named Arthur Bremer, who is charged with trying to kill George Wallace. Here now a report from NBC News correspondent John Palmer in Chicago.
Arthur H. Bremer, the man accused of shooting Governor Wallace, is described by his friends in Milwaukee as a lonely, quiet person who never talked very much about politics. Until they were informed last night that he'd been arrested, members of his family did not even know that Arthur Bremer had left the city and had gone to Maryland. The 21-year-old suspect lived alone in a three-room apartment on Milwaukee's west side. He was last seen here about a month ago. Federal agents who visited the apartment last night found a box of .38 caliber cartridges, a gun catalog, and a Confederate flag. They also found newspaper clippings, one of them relating the frustrations of newsmen trying to get past security guards to reach presidential candidates. A neighbor said at one time Bremer had a Wallace campaign sticker on the door of his apartment. Bremer's 18-year-old brother Roger said he could not think of any reason why Arthur would want to harm Governor Wallace.
I don't know. We never knew much about him. I never talked to enough of him. He's accused of shooting Governor Wallace in Laurel, Maryland this afternoon. Do you know what he would be doing there?
I don't know.
What's your reaction to that?
I don't know. I never thought I didn't think he was even out of town, you know.
Do you have a gun? Not that you know of. Do you play with guns or anything?
You know, went hunting, and I used to go hunting and stuff, you know, but he'd never touch a gun.
In the kitchen of the family home on Milwaukee's South Side, Brenner's father, William, a Milwaukee truck driver, and another brother, Theodore, talked with reporters.
I said, well, we wouldn't shoot a squirrel, we wouldn't shoot nothing. We wouldn't shoot, he didn't have a gun.
Did he have a quick temper?
Well, he could fly off the handle, but
Average, like anybody else.
Like anybody else.
I would bring my 3 children over here, and they'd be playing around with them and clowning around. He'd play around and clown around right along with them and have a good time. There's no explanation for if it was him, his behavior, and what had happened. There's no explanation we can give at all. We only hope that...
William Brunner said he was stunned when he first heard of his son's arrest. He said, "God knows, we hope he isn't connected with this," but the father said if he is involved, he must have been awfully sick. School officials in Milwaukee say Arthur Bremer was a poor student. After he left the family home last year and moved out of his apartment, Bremer worked as a janitor. Students, neighbors, and acquaintances offer a portrait of a young man who kept his opinions to himself. And the words of Bremer's younger brother, nobody could talk to him. We never knew very much about him. John Palmer, NBC News, Chicago.
For other news, we switch now to New York and Frank Blair.
Good morning, everyone. The U.S. command in Saigon said today that American bombers had cut the main fuel pipeline between Hanoi and the demilitarized zone. The announcement said all pumping stations on the line had been destroyed. It said the line had been capable of carrying more than 1,100 tons of fuel a day. American fighter bombers were also reported to have destroyed North Vietnam's air defense headquarters on the southern edge of Hanoi. There was only minor ground fighting, and American sources said the enemy was apparently trying to consolidate its positions before resuming its offensive. U.S. spokesman said it will be at least another 30 days before anyone can assess the effects of American air attacks on the enemy offensive.
The main weapons used in this new war is the 500-pound bomb. Air Force, Navy, and Marines are flying up to 300 missions a day over the north and nearly as many in the south. Another key weapon in the American arsenal is the rocket. There are many types. These are phosphorus rockets used to mark targets for the pilots. Other kinds are used to hit troop concentrations if the enemy makes the mistake of being caught out in the open. The men who fly these planes are the front-line fighters for the United States today. They carry the war to North Vietnam and pound enemy positions in the south in an effort to take pressure off the South Vietnamese on the ground. In spite of all this effort, the North Vietnamese still manage to get supplies through. It is just not possible to knock out every truck and convoy heading south or to silence every artillery position shelling South Vietnamese bases. Attacks from the air can slow the enemy down, but if he is to be stopped, it will have to be done by the troops on the ground. Rex Ellis, NBC News, Da Nang, South Vietnam.
The price of gold rose to a record high this morning on the London market, equivalent to $54.50 an ounce. The current wave of gold buying began after President Nixon announced that North Vietnam's harbors were being mined. The mayor of Saigon, Colonel Don Ken Nhu, announced this morning that police will strictly enforce a law against men wearing long hair. He said long hair is contrary to the spirit of vigilance required to confront the enemy offensive. Vice President Agnew arrived in Bangkok today for a 3-day visit, which had not been announced in advance. The Vice President had been in Tokyo for ceremonies at which Okinawa was returned to Japanese rule. There have been reports that he may also stop off in Saigon before returning home. More violence in Northern Ireland during the night. An explosion wrecked a tavern in a Protestant neighborhood in Belfast, injuring 17 persons. Gangs of young Protestants then went on a rampage, battling Catholics until British troops separated them. We'll have reactions from presidential candidate Senators McGovern and Humphrey in just 2 minutes, and we'll have the weather at the half hour. This is Today on NBC.
The shooting of Governor George Wallace drew expressions of shock, sympathy, and outrage from Wallace's leading rivals in the contest for the Democratic presidential nomination, Senator George McGovern and Senator Hubert Humphrey.
This is an act of violence which is deplorable. Any act of violence in this country only adds to the tensions and the troubles of our nation. What we need now, more than any time in our history, is a spirit of reconciliation. And quite obviously, an act of violence, even by one that may involve only a few, is a very sad and tragic event.
I can't help but think that the future of our country is terribly endangered by this kind of senseless violence. If men and women seeking high office have to be exposed to this kind of senseless, shocking attack, then it represents an attack on everything that this nation holds dear and of value. We're canceling all of our campaign activities, returning to Washington. We're taking our television, radio advertising, and all campaign activities out of circulation until further notice.
John Connally, wounded when President Kennedy was shot to death in Texas, said, "It's just unbelievable. It's tragic. It makes you want to weep that things like that could happen in this country." As I said earlier, Barbara Walters is in Detroit covering the Michigan primary, and last night she talked with some Michigan voters about the shooting of Governor George Wallace. Here's her report. Barbara?
This is the first primary that Michigan has had in 44 years. The downtown streets of Detroit, a city where the black population is just under 50%, is not exactly packed with people after dark. As a matter of fact, most of the streets seem completely deserted. Last night was calm and quiet, but we found an all-night drugstore. We by no means talk with a wide enough range of citizens to describe them as a cross-section of the state, but we got some strong reactions, and here's a sampling of them.
First, I don't like Governor Wallace, and I was kind of happy, but after I thought about it, I don't feel anybody should be shot or killed for the way they think, you know. And, like, I wouldn't want anybody else to win the election just because he was killed or assassinated.
Think it's going to change anyone's vote here?
I think it's going to make him win, I think, a few more votes.
It's a bad situation when you can't go out and talk with, what you believe and not get shot for it.
I wasn't surprised because I felt that sooner or later Wallace was going to meet with some type of violence because, you see, Wallace, he's off with his people, you see. But it's ironic that one of his own people, ripped him off.
Well, I didn't think he should get shot because he's nice. And whoever did it was wrong.
But my feelings are that it just seems that when people have their own convictions and they're running for office and they feel very strongly about it, it just seems that there's always some group around that ready to mow them down. This happened to the Kennedys. I think it's a sad state of affairs in our country when a man wants to run for president and is killed. We're a very violent country, and I just hope that this isn't a reflection on the whole country as a whole.
So I wonder if you can tell me how you felt today. You've been selling the papers with the front page story about Governor Wallace. What was your feeling when you heard about it?
I'd like to thank the person that shot him.
Why?
Because any fool that does that is out of his own mind.
Are you going to vote in the primary?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us who you're going to vote for?
Wallace.
Is this going to change your vote in any way, the shooting
No,
of Governor
it's not going to change my vote at all, but I really feel bad. I just couldn't get over it. I was so shocked. But really, it's not going to change my vote at all.
Were you planning, can you tell me, to vote for Governor Wallace?
No, I was not.
And you're going to stick with whoever the man was that you were originally going to vote for?
Right.
Well, no, it's not going to change my vote because I wasn't going to vote for Wallace anyway. But in all respect to the man himself, I feel that if a man's going to run for what he believes in and be truthful and then what he believes in, then you've got to respect him. But in the same sense, our society, the way it's built up, to shoot a man or to kill a man for what he believes in is wrong.
What was your feeling when you heard that he had
Well,
been
it's bad. I hate to see anybody get shot. It's awful bad. You know what I mean? It hurt anybody. When Kennedy got shot and King got shot and Robert Kennedy and all that. Man, it's bad. You know what I mean? I hate to see anybody get shot like that.
We'll be back after this station break.
See NBC News coverage of the Michigan and Maryland primaries tonight.
It's the skinny look this summer. Not this one. This is the skinny look, with new skinful sandals from Kinney Shoes. A whole bevy of skinnies that are barely there, so your feet can run around almost naked, daytime, nighttime, anytime. Kinney's skinnies, for a skinnier than thou look, even if you are not.
Walk around the world of fashion, Kinney's got the shoes.
Good morning. Partly cloudy today in Washington. Chance of a thunder shower this afternoon. High today about 75. Right now it's 56 degrees. Doctors are keeping a close watch on the condition of Governor George Wallace. He remains on the critical list from 4 bullet wounds he suffered at the hands of a would-be assassin after a political rally yesterday in Laurel, Maryland. 3 other persons were wounded. One eyewitness to the shooting tells what he saw.
He was laying here, and the lady, I think she got shot in the leg. She was laying right over here, right behind him. And they were the only 2 laying down. And this lady, she got shot too. She was behind him. She could call one of the stray bullets. But he took his shirt loose, and one of his campaign guys come over, and he just unbuttoned his shirt, and he was trying to stop the blood, but you see, he says, They didn't get me. He says, I'm going to make it.
Doctors at Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring say one bullet is lodged against the governor's spine and that he is paralyzed from the waist down. However, they say it is too early to tell if the paralysis is permanent.
This is News 4 Washington Today with Don Doak.
The bridge, one of man's mightiest creations. It takes years to build a big one, and it serves for generations. Who builds these giants? United States Steel does. We're involved. In fact, over the past 70 years, our American Bridge Division has built the majority of America's big bridges. A bridge like this may call for over 28,000 tons of steel and hundreds of rugged bridgemen to connect it all together. It can take a fleet of many special vessels, barges, tugboats, scows, and floating cranes before the last piece of steel finally goes into place. Building a bridge is quite a job, but the job they do for you is even bigger. We're helping build America's bridges. At United States Steel, we're involved.
A man from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 21-year-old Arthur Bremer, is charged with shooting Governor Wallace and a Secret Service man. Bremer is being held under $200,000 bond in Baltimore following his appearance before a U.S. magistrate. The shooting occurred at a campaign stop at a shopping center in Laurel, Maryland. The agent, Nicholas Zarvos, underwent surgery for a bullet wound in the neck. He is listed as in good condition. Alabama State Police Captain E.C. Dothard also was hit. He was treated for a flesh wound and released from the hospital. A Wallace campaign worker, Dora Thompson, suffered a leg wound and is listed in satisfactory condition. The Alabama governor, the Senators Humphrey and McGovern, are considered the main contenders among 11 Democratic candidates on the Maryland ballot for today's primary. At stake are 53 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. The 48 local delegates must cast their first 2 convention ballots for the candidates who win in their congressional district. A scheduled Wallace rally at Annapolis last night turned into a prayer meeting for the wounded governor of Alabama. Alabama Senator James Allen led the prayer with the words, "Lord, we thank thee for Governor Wallace." Mr. Humphrey cut short his campaigning in Maryland after the shooting yesterday and drove to the hospital in Silver Spring. Another Maryland contender, as we mentioned, Senator McGovern, also called off his campaigning from the Michigan primary and returned to Washington. The weather outlook for Washington and vicinity: partly cloudy today and tonight with a chance of an afternoon thunderstorm. High today in the mid-70s, low tonight in the middle 50s. Tomorrow fair, high in the mid-70s. The chance of rain 40% today and 20% tonight and tomorrow. Winds today westerly about 10 miles per hour. Right now, winds are out of the south-southwest at 6 miles an hour. The relative humidity 93%, and the present temperature in Washington 56 degrees. This is Don Doak. In a moment, back to Today in New York.
More News 4 Washington Today with Don Doak at 8:25.
Ow! It hurt my... Ow! After shampoos, combing doesn't always come easy. But you can spray away snarls and tangles with Hair So New. It's fast, fun, easy to do. To get the knots out of every head in the house, try the one-step, spray on, no rinse, cream rinse. Hair So New.
Good morning again. We're in Washington for another half hour of our special report on the Today program of the shooting of Alabama Governor George Wallace yesterday afternoon. Governor Wallace was shot 4 times after a campaign speech in Laurel, Maryland, in a wind-up of that state's primary, which is being conducted today. Wallace underwent 5 hours of surgery at Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, actually a suburb of Washington, D.C. For a late report on the governor's condition, here is Gordon Graham at the hospital.
At this hour, recovery for Alabama Governor George Wallace is a matter of degree. At 2 o'clock this morning, doctors issued a bulletin saying that after 5 hours in surgery, Governor Wallace's condition was still serious, but all of his vital life signs were stable. One of the 4 bullets which struck the governor is still lodged near his spinal column, and he is paralyzed from the waist down. We'll have another bulletin in about 30 minutes, and we'll have a report. Gordon Graham, NBC News at Holy Cross Hospital, Silver Spring, Maryland. Now,
21-year-old Arthur Bremer of Milwaukee, who allegedly shot Wallace, was immediately seized by police and is being held in Baltimore, charged with intent to murder. We'll be back with more details and a discussion of this story later in the program. First, here with the rest of the news is Frank Blair in New York.
Good morning, everyone. The U.S. command said this morning that a full week of sustained air raids against North Vietnam wrecked the country's air defense headquarters near Hanoi, where earlier intelligence reports had said Russian advisors and technicians worked. The main pipeline supplying oil to Hanoi's troops in the DMZ and South Vietnam was also knocked out during the series of 2,000 air strikes. According to the American command, the raids also cut more than 70 rail and road supply lines carrying equipment to North Vietnamese troops. In the ground war, North Vietnamese troops and tanks attacked Kon Tum for the second straight day. American B-52s dropped more than 700 tons of bombs around the city trying to disrupt the enemy attack. United Press International reported this morning from Washington that the United States is sending another aircraft carrier, the Ticonderoga, to South Vietnamese waters. It would bring the total number of carriers operating in the area to 7. In Paris, the communist delegation to the Vietnam peace talks formally requested resumption of the negotiations, which were called off by the United States on May the 4th. The price of gold jumped by more than $1 an ounce this morning on the London exchange, hitting a record high of $54.50 an ounce. The increased demand for gold, along with a weakening of the U.S. dollar, began after President Nixon announced the mining of North Vietnamese ports more than a week ago. Vice President Agnew, who had been in Tokyo for the ceremonies turning Okinawa over to Japanese rule, made an unscheduled side trip to Bangkok this morning. Officials said he would be there for 3 days for conferences with Thailand's leaders. A bomb went off in a tavern in the Protestant section of Belfast during the night, injuring at least 17 persons. Protestant youths, angered by the bombing, went on a window-breaking, violent rampage for several hours afterwards, clashing with Catholic gangs in a battle that had to be broken up by British soldiers. That's the news. Weather in a moment. Time is 34 after the hour. We're going to show you what looks like an ordinary tire, but it's not. This one is in a class by itself. Watch.
I want you to get a good look at that tire and tell me how many miles are on it. Okay?
35,000.
Okay. What would you say if I told you there's over 70,000 miles on that tire?
Kind of hard to believe.
I don't believe it. It's hard to believe. That's as many miles as I got on my car, and I've had a third set on there.
We asked people to tell us how many miles were on this Sears steel-belted radio.
25,000.
And hardly anybody even came close.
38,000.
How much?
About 38,000.
The same tire on the same car was driven over 70,000 miles in a supervised mileage test. Sears steel-belted radio, the proven radio.
You know, the mileage you get depends on how you drive.
Wow.
It seems impossible you get 70,000 miles on a tire like that. It's a Sears steel-belted radio.
Only at Sears.
Severe thunderstorms this afternoon and evening from southeastern Oklahoma into western Arkansas and northwest Louisiana to all of Texas except for the northwest and southern sections. Northern New England will have more rain today. Scattered showers and thunder showers are due across New York and Pennsylvania into Ohio, eastern West Virginia, and Maryland. The southeast will be fair and mild, but with thunder showers in Florida. The Midwest and Mississippi Valley area will be fair and warm. In the plains, a strong warming trend with 80 and 90-degree readings for this afternoon. The plateau and mountain states will be fair and very warm with temperatures in the 80s. It'll be hot in the southwest with more 100s for the deserts. Cooler weather continues to move across the northwestern states with showers from the coast to southern Idaho. And the temperature map for this afternoon shows a great wedge of much above normal 80 and 90-degree temperatures building up in the central half of the nation. The northeast and the northwest will be nearer seasonable levels with 60s and 70s. Time is 36 after the hour. And now a word from Curad, the bandage with a new kind of stick.
That's the bandage. The one that you probably buy. Here's the other bandage, Curad. I'm wearing Curads all over to show how well they stick. See, Curad has an improved adhesive that resists water, even perspiration. Look, Curad's improved adhesive really sticks and stays stuck. Also, Curad is the only bandage with the ouchless Tuffa pad. See? Ouchless pad, better sticking adhesive. Try Curad, the other bandage. You'll stick with it.
And for man-sized cuts and scrapes, use ouchless Telfa adhesive pads with the same better sticking adhesive. Curad bandages, Telfa adhesive pads, both ouchless, both stick and stay stuck.
We have some late baseball scores. In the National League, the Los Angeles Dodgers beat the San Diego Padres 2-1. In the American League, the Oakland Athletics defeated the California Angels also by 2-1. Athletics pitcher Denny McLean was sent to the minors yesterday. The 28-year-old right-hander has been hit hard recently, and so it's on to Birmingham of the Southern League for McLean and his $75,000 contract. McLean won 31 games for the Detroit Tigers in 1968, the peak year of his career, and the year the Tigers won the World Series. The New York Nets evened the American Basketball Association championship last night by beating the Indiana Pacers 110-105 at Uniondale, New York. Both teams have won 2 games each in the best-of-7 series. Game 5 will be played Thursday night in Indiana. Jim Malloy, the race driver, injured Sunday while trying to qualify for the Indianapolis 500, remained unconscious through the night. Early today, his condition was still listed as critical. The 36-year-old Malloy suffered broken legs and hips, a broken arm, and second-degree burns on his face, hands, and back when his car crashed into a wall. Time is 39 after the hour. Now to Washington, and here is Frank McGee.
In Governor Wallace's home state of Alabama, the full impact of his shooting is being felt. With a report of some of the reactions in Alabama to the assassination attempt, here is Kenley Jones at station WSFA in Montgomery.
The shock and dismay was felt more deeply in Alabama, probably, than anywhere else. In Montgomery, about 500 Wallace supporters and government officials held a prayer meeting on the steps of the state capitol. Governor Wallace's personal pastor led the invocation.
Let us pray. Our gracious Father, we are thankful that in a time and hour like this, we can turn to Thee, and the faith that we have held so long now will hold us.
Among those taking part was Lieutenant Governor Jerry Beasley, the man who would become governor if Wallace were unable to serve out his term.
Our Lord, please be with Governor Wallace and his family tonight during this trying time, and unite all people in this country and make it safe once again for our public office holders to live normal lives and in safety for themselves and their families.
Most of the speakers took a religious tone rather than a political one. An exception was Gordon Tucker, a field director for the Citizens Council of Alabama. The council no longer uses the word white in its title.
Because in this tragic event we find embodied what the governor has tried to point out to the American electorate for almost these 10 years. We have come to a tragic state in this nation when we find bullets being substituted for ballots. And this is apparently what is being attempted. This is not some South American banana republic. This is America, I would hope.
There were no blacks in the crowd on the Capitol steps, but several black leaders across the state denounced the assassination attempt.
But I condemn the shooting of Governor Wallace because he is a human. He is a man that governor of our state, and we respect him as that because the people elected him. If the people hadn't wanted him, he wouldn't have been elected. So he's my governor as well as he is the others. So I'm saying to the family of Governor Wallace, you have our prayers, you have our sympathy. We as the Negro race cannot rejoice at nobody's downfall.
One of his crusades in Birmingham. In an interview with station WAPI, he too denounced the shooting, and he called for a return to law and order.
And I think the Supreme Court is going to have to reevaluate our laws and strengthen our laws to do something about skyjacking, hijacking, and the crime that is sweeping this country. We are involved in an orgy and a pornography of crime in America. It's got to be stopped, or we're going to have anarchy on our hands. Governor Wallace called me yesterday on the phone and said that he was thinking about us, praying for our crusade here in his home state of Alabama, and that he would be here to attend the crusade toward the end of the week. And we were looking forward to his coming. And now an assassination attempt has been made on him, and with millions of Americans, both black and white, we join in shock, but also in prayers that God will help restore him to health, and prayers for his family.
The realization of what has happened is just beginning to sink in here, and a lot of questions are still unanswered. What will happen to the Wallace campaign now? His workers say they will carry on, and no doubt a lot of them will. But George Wallace was his own ignition spark in his campaign for the presidency, and without him, a lot of the fire will be gone. Kenley Jones, NBC News in Montgomery, Alabama.
And we will be back after this message.
Where's my briefcase?
Here's your dinosaur. Watch out for the mailman.
If it's going to be one of those days and caffeine bothers you, don't add to your problems. Try Sanka brand decaffeinated coffee. It's 97% caffeine-free. So all you get is a good, smooth-tasting cup of coffee. Sanka coffee. If it's going to be one of those days, who needs caffeine?
I missed the bus.
A perfect Caesar salad used to be a lot of work. You needed homemade croutons, lemon, grated Romano cheese, anchovies, and garlic. But now, Kraft Golden Caesar dressing pours on all but the croutons, and they shake out from a Bel Air carton. So go ahead, render justice to your taste buds with toasted, crunchy croutons from Bel Air and the noblest Caesar of them all from Kraft.
The pros and cons of forced school busing take on added meaning after the shooting of Governor George Wallace. Barbara Walters, who is in Detroit, will explore the subject of busing with two opposing factions in just a moment. First, a station break.
See NBC News coverage of the Michigan and Maryland primaries tonight.
With a girl who is very today.
The assassination attempt on Governor Wallace has overshadowed the primaries being held today in Maryland and Michigan. They seem now like an anticlimax to the shooting yesterday in Laurel, Maryland. In Michigan, the main issue was forced school busing, an issue on which Governor Wallace is expected to carry the state. Barbara Walters is in our Detroit studio with two guests this morning, each of whom takes an opposing view of the matter of busing.
Well, to put it in some perspective, this is the first primary that the state of Michigan has had in 44 years. It had been choosing its delegates by convention and party caucus. It's 132 delegates will be selected here. And there's expected to be a large Republican crossover, larger than in Wisconsin, because the busing issue is an issue that does not seem to have party lines. The issue, the busing issue that has Americans in an uproar, pro and con, across the country, is perhaps nowhere more dramatically present than here in Michigan. In the city of Pontiac, for example, there were big and sometimes violent anti-busing demonstrations last fall. And a Pontiac housewife, Mrs. Irene McCabe, walked her way to national recognition this spring when she and a half a dozen other women hiked on foot all the way to Washington to express their indignation over busing to achieve racial balance in the schools. This was a 41-day walk. It ended with an audience with the top assistant to President Nixon, John Ehrlichman. The pro-busing forces are on the move, too, organizing pro-busing white suburbanites at coffee clutches and going door-to-door with pro-busing petitions. One of the organizers of those who favor busing is Mrs. Alma Stallworth. She's a Democrat and a member of the Michigan House of Representatives, elected from a racially mixed neighborhood in northwest Detroit. And we invited Mrs. Stallworth and Mrs. McCabe to discuss the busing issue with us this morning. Good morning. Of course, after the news yesterday of the shooting with Governor Wallace, the issue is, it seems, all the more hot, and probably the two opposing sides even firmer in their views. Do you think that's the way it will be?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that we had the tragedy of the shooting of Governor Wallace, but with the racial implications of the busing issue, I think that we all have to be aware of this is the tone of our country, and unless we can bring forces together, I feel that there will be more of the same.
Most people who oppose school busing deny that race has anything to do with their opposition, and those on the other side, such as you, Mrs. Stallworth, often say that prejudice is the basis of it. How do you feel about that, Mrs. McCabe?
Well, I think that Mrs. Stallworth just said it very adequately when she said the racial implications of the forced busing. This is the sole reason for busing is by race. And I know that Governor Wallace's attempted assassination yesterday redoubles my determination to put an end to busing for race. You see, we are told on one hand to be colorblind, and this is how I have lived and how I have raised my children. Children are children, people are people, and to bus them for race only is simply, again, drawing attention to the differences in the races, and I disapprove of this for many reasons, but that being one of them. I wanted to pick up on what Mrs. Stallworth just said.
You can give your other views as well at this time.
Wonderful. You know, having experienced the situation now for one full year, I can say with great emphasis that it is a negative factor on race relations. It is a negative factor on education. They have lowered the educational standards, the academic achievement standards when they're testing youngsters. It has been a negative factor as far as integration in our city is concerned. Immediately in the first year, we lost 11% of our white student body because of the white flight. They left the city of Pontiac, our school district, and fled to the suburbs. It has been a negative factor as far as financing a school system is concerned. There are so many meritorious reasons to be against the forced busing.
You have said that your feeling is one of being without prejudice, that you had brought your child up to be colorblind.
Yes.
You don't think that prejudice is the basis of this, then?
No, I do not.
You speak also of it being an issue of good education, but I would wonder if you had a special problem sometimes replying to your critics in that you've kept your 11-year-old daughter out of school since last fall when busing began in Pontiac. Don't you feel do you feel that some kind of education is better than absolutely none?
Barbara, let me assure you and the rest of whoever is watching the nation that my daughter is receiving an education, and I, as a parent, am exercising my maternal rights to choose how she is educated. I could not fight this issue without somehow defying the court order. I am in defiance of a federal court order right now, pleading to be arrested and prosecuted on this cause so that our point of view, can have our day in court. We have been denied entrance into the court system, which is actually every citizen's right. And we've been denied this, so the only way we will get into court is by defying the federal court order.
Just to make things very clear, if you do not think that it's a racial issue in any sense, why specifically do you oppose having your child go to be bused? Is it because of the long bus ride, or what is it?
It is none of those issues in my case. It is a matter, it's a constitutional question. It has been from the very beginning. This was my immediate reaction. 1 year later, I still see it as a denial of my constitutional rights. It would be a denial of Mrs. Stallworth's constitutional rights also. I want to retain my freedom of association, my freedom of choice.
But it has nothing to do with where your child goes to school. It's a constitutional question.
You know what, Barbara? I have my two oldest children in a parochial integrated school. I removed them from the public school out of choice and put them into a parochial integrated school. But I had a freedom of choice in this case.
Mrs. Stallworth.
Well, I think that we have to admit this is quite controversial in terms of what people feel is their constitutional right. I think it's unfortunate that Mrs. McCabe and her group cannot identify the same frustration that black parents face in trying to achieve the quality education that she's talking about. And since my term in the legislature, I can be more assured than ever that the same racist attitude reinforces the system that makes possible the educational finance for our schools in the state of Michigan. And because of racism, our children are denied the proper funding, the proper facilities, the proper resources that would guarantee all of the things that she spoke to in terms of what busing would mean to children. Now, in terms of the Pontiac situation, as you know, they defeated their millage. It will cost the city of Pontiac more than $3 million. In terms of services, there will be no special education, physical education, library services, and I question whether or not the issue of busing is worth the sacrifice that all children and all families will be required to make simply because you have one group that's opposed to it. The other thing that I feel that in the city of Detroit, we face a deficit of more than $31 million, and if we do not pass our millage, then our schools will close in September. And we have already been told in those areas where we have predominantly white residing that they are opposing the millage on the basis of the busing. Now,
does everybody know what you mean by millage?
Well, the millage is based on property tax, and we have to renew it, plus increase it to 5 mills to make up the deficit and to sustain us for
Let me ask you a specific question. You have a 16-year-old son, and he's going to school now in Detroit.
Yes.
Are you anxious for him to be bused to a suburban school?
Well, actually, most of my constituents bus their children anyway. Those of, in my district, I guess it could be considered one of the more affluent districts in the city of Detroit.
Why do they bus them?
Because they want better education. They send them to Oak Park.
Now, are these private schools that they're busing
They're
them
public
to?
schools.
They're public schools.
And they're paying their own transportation.
They are busing them themselves to have them sent to the better schools?
Yes. Now, in the legislature during the last session, we spent $79 million on busing. So what I'm saying is transportation is part of education just as it is in every facet of living now.
We had heard earlier, I remember when this question was raised when we were in Florida, that there are a great many blacks who were against busing.
Yes, blacks have mixed feelings about busing, but I think most of us have to realize that if we're going to get the benefit of our tax dollar, and all of us are not on welfare and ADC, you know, as some people think, then we will have to force the issue so that we will get the necessary funds to sustain those schools, those community schools in our neighborhood. Of course, we would like to have the community school concept, but what we've found, since we're segregated and isolated, we never get the kind of attention that's necessary. So it's my feeling, if the situation is integrated, then regardless to what the formula is and what the source of revenue is, then everyone will get the benefit.
Mrs. McCabe, in Boston there's a program to bus talented black youngsters from the inner city, mostly black schools, to the better, mostly white schools in the suburbs. How would you feel if busing were limited to this?
I don't approve of busing for a racial balance for any reason. You know, before I became involved in this, we made a study in our city in Pontiac to see to it that each school had equal educational opportunities.
Well, how do you think that could be provided if there is not busing? We have very little time, but
if there is not busing, let's take that money, the money that is extremely important, and improve schools. But the schools aren't what needs improvement because it is not the plant or the facilities available that create an equal educational environment. It is the teacher who motivates the youngster, and the teacher alone who is responsible for 79%.
So your
rest of it
solution
comes
is better
from the
teachers
home.
or better educated
Absolutely.
teachers?
Put that money into investigating why the teachers are the caliber that they are. Let's check into the home.
I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt, but this is an issue we're not going to solve here. It does affect the vote, but we're going to be hearing a good deal more about it, I'm sure, in the weeks to come until the conventions. I thank you, Mr. Stallworth and Mrs. McCabe, and we'll be back after this message from Joe on tape.
I'm going to show you how this bag of Domino sugar can save you money on breakfast products you use every day. Pure Domino sugar has been a natural ingredient of homemade cooking and baking for many a year. And the folks at Domino Sugar want to make sure you get the best and save money, too, with store coupons right on their bright yellow 5-pound bags. Coupons for savings on delicious breakfast products to brighten your mornings. Look, there are 3 coupons on every bag. Now, this one's worth 10 cents off on any size of spoon-size shredded wheat by Nabisco. The second is worth 5 cents off on a 5-pound bag of Domino sugar. And a third is worth 10 cents off on any size of regular Nabisco shredded wheat. Now, that's a total of 25 cents savings in all. Good on your next purchase of these fine products. And all you do to use them is cut them out and take them to your grocer. These specially marked bags of pure Domino sugar will be on sale for a limited time only, so look for them on your grocer's shelf. Domino sugar in over 20 varieties and sizes makes it so easy to bring back the good taste of homemade. And get 25 cents in money-saving coupons, too.
Again, Governor Wallace's condition is stabilized. A bullet is lodged near his spine. He is...
Michigan, Maryland, 2 important primaries in one night, and NBC News will be there with live coverage of the returns Tuesday at 10:30, 9:30 Central, and 7:30 Pacific Time. Decision 72. You make it. We
There's a new wave of excitement around us. People are getting back to their country.